Hello and welcome to another episode of Mordred's Community Multiplayer Political Chat. Joined as always by the Martian. Martian, how's it going?
Going good.
So, great powers. Anything jump off the list at you? Anything you want to touch on here?
I think it's obviously, Aelnar not being number one great power. I lament, I mourn, but that is just a temporary thing. But I'm very impressed to see Raj Nahaga is starting to creep up the power list. And they're really starting to get big over by themselves. So it's gonna be curious to see what they do with all of that. And also that eighth spot for great powers is incredibly contested. So I'm really curious to see if Nushar can hold that spot. If I'm sure we'll have a new player their next session. But it's really interesting watching that slot kind of rotate back and forth.
Yeah, it appears that there's a little bit of gap here. One and two. Jad Empire obviously hiding quite a bit of development in Marches. Then three through eight is relatively compact, but then when you look at, we'll say, from Castanor down to Drake's Guard. You've got one, two, three, four, five, six, 7 players stuck within 500 dev of each other. Um, Quite a bit of jockeying there. I'm I'm interested to see if Ernat Veer or Odval Khanzad pops up on the Great Power list at the end of this coming session. I believe
Hmm.
that would be the first time we have a dwarf on the Great Power list. Um,
Yeah.
it's been something I've been expecting, but we just haven't seen it yet. And
Hmm.
yeah, this might be the opportunity for it.
Certainly.
So we started this past week session with quite a bit of war. We had essentially the Empire in a two-front war against Laurent, Newshire, and the Overclan. Alinar came in a little bit late and took some pressure off the Empire by engaging with Laurent. The outcome, the Empire won, hands down. They took a decent chunk off of Newshire, pushed them back, took a bit off of Laurent. Laurent relatively humbled now. I think we're seeing the advantage of meta ideas from Demaria from a manpower perspective versus Laurent. That might have been the final battle between these two parties. It's now, it seems, the balance of powers tipped in favor of Demaria. The Empire consolidated quite a few of the AIs over the past session. Um, is there anything to rival the imperial supremacy that we now find ourselves in with West Canor here?
It's kind of hard to tell, and I think a lot of it depends on two players in particular, with that being Bjarnrik and the Gnomish hierarchy. Right
New
now,
players coming into both countries, by the way.
Gnomish hierarchy has been really quiet this MP, but the nation's in a good spot after last session. They're in a position that they could really start actually, start punching with their weight. In that war with Laurent and Demaria, before the Aelnar, additions to it, it was a very close war, and it's going to be a lot harder for Demaria. Um, and so, if Laurent can find a way to get in another conflict like that with Demaria, with Aelnar not being involved, they stand a lot better chance than they might assume. And then also with Bjarnrik now bordering Telgier and Conwell, they're in a position now where they can very easily go after members of the Empire with Newshire and the Overclan, right? So while they've gotten through these two major wars, you still see more on the horizon quite easily. Lots of players who have a lot of fun to be had with fighting members of the Empire.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like Bjarnrik is in a relatively unique spot. You can see their armies are massing on this border. Previously, they had basically all their armies over here in the northern pass facing off against the centaurs. Looks like they've come to some sort of agreement. Do you know anything about this? Is it relatively flimsy, or is there peace between the centaurs and Bjarnrik for the rest of the MP?
From what I've understood, it was a somewhat flimsy thing, but at the end of the day, it's a new player now, right? So, the likelihood of any standing deal holding it, anyways, is somewhat low, right? Because lots of times when a player swaps, the deals swap. Um, and so I think that it's a big unknown here once again. Obviously for the Centaurs, their zeal is running out very soon. So if they want to have good wars, they need to do them now, essentially.
Is there a way to
Um,
check the main seal? Oh,
yeah, if you go
40
to the
more years.
decisions,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah, 40 years. Which obviously, not a lot of time, and once that happens, they lose a lot of good bonuses, go
Yeah,
through
basically just
disaster.
this session.
Yeah. So they get one more session, and so I could very easily see them pushing for another war here. But there's kind of no way to tell at the moment, I think. It's going to happen in DMs across this week.
And then Bjarnrik and Castanor had been one of the stronger duos in the MP, obviously both on the Great Power list. Probably right up there with Ernatvyr and the Centaurs and Newshire and Overclan as probably the three strongest duos or alliances. With a new player coming into Bjarnrik, what do you think is going to happen with Castanor? Do you expect this relationship to continue, or do you think Bjarnrik may look to move down their mission tree towards Black Castanor?
I think right now for Bjornrik, it's one of those things that you only have one ally in the game. You're not in an exactly easy spot because you still do have the centaurs and the dwarves bordering you, and a lot easier expansion into the hierarchy. Right, the hierarchy right now is taking a substantial chunk of trade away from Bjornrik. A lot of money is leaving that node because of not owning the Storm Isles that are controlled currently by the Gnomish hierarchy. So I don't see any reason for this alliance to end for either party here. They've got both of them have pretty easy expansion with Castnor going into the New Shire, Bjornrik going to the hierarchy. There's no real reason to fight each other at the moment.
And then as we shift a little bit south, Serenovar tried to take advantage of a New Shire that was weakened from the Imperial War, had been attacked by AI Castanor, ended up paying for it. Lost a few of their core territories, lost the gains that they had taken from New Shire in a previous war. Is there anything left for Mindboy, or was that one mistake too many for him this MP?
I mean, it's the same thought as before, where it just depends on how much the Jad's willing to enable him. Like right now, individually, there's not much he can do, right? Um, also he's attritioning 94,000 troops on one tile right now, but um, oh, he's getting more exhaustion. I'm sorry. But yeah, it depends on what the Jad lets him do, essentially. He can't really easily attack into any of his neighbors. The easiest being Ernat Veer, probably, and with that, you're still fighting Ernat Veer and the Centaurs, which means a very difficult war. So there's not a lot for them at the moment.
And then we'll shift. Keterata, been relatively quiet the past few sessions, has been recovering, starting to come along. Quite a bit of manpower. Obviously, not the million mark that some other players have crossed, but overall, I would say top half. Um, it seems like they have some relationships with the Overclan, with Newshire. Do you expect to see them making any more noise in maybe a Keterata Overclan Newshire versus the Empire type showdown?
I could maybe see it, but I think at the end of the day, I don't think they're gonna have much influence on their own at this point. I think anything they do is gonna be part of, some big giant world war that everyone gets involved in. And at this point, I mean, yeah, I was kind of hopeful for several sessions that they might, come back and try and, get going again, but it just hasn't happened. And at this point, I don't see it happening.
Yeah, it might be a little bit late at this point. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. Shifting now a little bit further east, we've got the Jad Empire, we've got Verkal Gulin, Odval Khanzad, and Rajnadhaga. Relatively quiet from a player-on-player conflict between all these parties. Do you expect anything to change over the next couple of weeks, or is it peace in the east?
I think the issue is for any of them to attack a player, it would probably just be attacking into the Jad, which obviously poses a huge difficulty with the Jad's diplomatic network for RP reasonings, for just getting enough troops on the field. It'd be very difficult to actually pose a threat. You could maybe see a conflict between Avol Khanzad and the Raj late game, just to for the players to have some fun in a player war. But I don't see a lot of meaningful wars happening here.
And then when we take a look at the Jad Empire, we did not mention two hegemonies established last session. We have a military and a naval one. Economics still up for grabs. It's going to be tricky the way the hegemonies are structured to have an economic hegemon, I
At,
believe.
at this point, I would say it's probably impossible to get one for any of the current players, just because of the fact that of the income of both the Jad and Aelnar being so high, and you having to pass both of them. Um, Obviously, with the Jads, being at 1.3k, just
This is
super hard to
actually
overcome.
just an issue with the save when you load up. For some reason, it does not show the trade companies correctly. So it's closer to 1-1 rather than 1-3. And
Hmm,
then also from
okay.
a force limit perspective, it's actually below 1,000. But yeah,
Still a big amount of income, and none of the players really have a position to get that much income. Potentially if the Dame's Head gets some improvements and you have one player controlling it, then you could see some stuff there, but be super duper late game.
and from a naval hegemony perspective, obviously your navy quite large, 280. Bjarnrik not too far behind though. Any
Hmm.
concerns about having to compete for the naval hegemony moving forward?
The issue for Bjarnrik is the fact that I still have another 100 force limit that I can build up to anytime, and Bjarnrik is already pretty well over their force limit. Um, and so it's just they have a issue that it won't ever be economical enough for them to catch up, right? Even if they stop the ticking progress for a while, it's not a huge deal. It's not like the naval hegemon's that crazy. um so it's just not there's not a way to justify it for them at the moment. So
And then I did want to circle back, touch on the new world. Drake's Guard, relatively quiet the past few sessions, but building up quite a bit of development down here. Um,
mhm.
do you see Dominic coming back and making a splash in the Empire, or is he comfortable with his current pace and uh, expansion options?
I mean, props to him if he does, but I think at this point it would be very difficult to do that. And at this, I mean, just from having enough ships to do it, right? It's kind of rough. You got to build a lot, and there's plenty. I mean, right now he can kind of just play an assisted single player game, right? And I think he's probably fine with that, right? I mean, obviously this was, kind of backup plan for his nation, and just kind of a way to stay in the MP and get to have some fun. It's a shame that we lost the other player in the South, because that kind of eliminates any easy forms of PvP for Dominic. But
I could see Drake's Guard versus Catarata being an interesting war. From a development perspective, manpower perspective, relatively even matched. What are your thoughts on something like that popping up once we hit Diplotech 23 this coming week?
I think it's a lot like having to have like an Aelnar Jad fight, right? You're, it's just getting across the sea. It's just so difficult to do with meaningful enough numbers to actually land that it's just super hard to pull off, and I don't see that happening. Especially knowing Dominic as a player, I don't see that happening. I think Dominic would rather just just play the game off on his own for the moment. So.
The Jad Navy is expanding, though. Just one thing
I,
to note.
s- I assume for some shenanigans within the Empire to get across a lane faster.
We'll see. We'll see. Um, yeah, outside the two major wars that we started the session with, a little bit of difficulty for New Shire versus AI. Relatively quiet session from my perspective. Agree or
Mm.
disagree?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that came to, the powers recovering from those two major wars, right? I mean, Laurent went bankrupt from that war, obviously not going to do anything for a while. New Shire losing land. The Overclan lost a lot of manpower, was just generally annoyed to be in the war. And so I think all of those powers weren't really feeling a war. And Bjarnrik was kind of that player's been stalemated the entire MP, so we weren't going to see anything there. And in the East, all our dwarves are generally pretty passive players, so it's not a huge surprise. And I think any future wars will probably look similar to the ones we just had.
Yeah, when we look at the Imperial participants, Conwell, Telgier, Demaria, all sitting around their manpower caps, so they're recovered, and there's a
Hmm.
tremendous amount of money in the Empire. Telgier 5,000, Conwell 4,000, Demaria 15,000. Obviously, Istralor not up there. Had some struggles early with wars against Demaria, but the generals they can bring to the fight 6-6, 6-6, 4-6. Um,
Hmm.
I'm going to make a prediction. I see the most noise coming from the Empire in an offensive fashion this coming week.
I
Where do you think?
definitely think that's definitely a good bet. I think we could expect a war like that. I think we could also expect seeing a conflict between Bjarnrik and the hierarchy after that war, and then also potentially more Castanor New Shire wars. I think all of them very, very likely to happen this next session.
And then obviously coming back to Vanille and these three provinces here, do you expect to have to fight for them, or do you think matters are settled?
I mean, if a player wants to fight for them, they can, but as of right now, I'm being very passive with them, right? I mean, if you look at it from Laurent's perspective, you can attempt to fight for these islands and go through what you just went through again. Whenever I'm not privateering, I'm not harassing you, I'm not declaring war on you, and you could just leave it, right? So I don't think Laurent will try and take it because I think Laurent knows it will not ever be worth it for them, and if Bjarnrik tried to take something, it wouldn't be there, right? So obviously it's defended, but I just don't think it's a serious threat at the moment.
And you mentioned something interesting. Privateering hasn't been a big factor so far in the MP. I know there was a little bit between Laurent and Demaria going back and forth. There's a tremendous amount of value in the Dame's Head node.
Hmm.
Do you think that's going to be challenged by other players? Bjarnrik obviously has a large naval force. They could put a very large number of ships in this node. Catarata could build up quickly, the Overclan, etc. Um,
Hmm.
it's interesting compared to Vanilla. I think there's a higher concentration of wealth in the Dame's Head than even like the English Channel, because sometimes the English Channel gets split between the Channel, Sevilla, Genoa, etc. Um,
Hmm.
what are your feelings about the Dame's Head moving forward?
I think you might try to see players privateer it, but it'd be difficult for any player to privateer it, right? I mean, obviously, distance-wise, the Overclan, now that they've lost their island back to Orda Aldrizia, is kind of far away to be privateering. Kedarata, once they integrate the Stalwart Band, which they are currently 45% of the way through, they'll probably have a close enough range to do it. But the only issue is for any of those powers, as soon as you privateer the James Head and an Empire player notices, you have to be ready for a war against them, which none of them are in a great position to do. So it'd be tricky to privateer James Head just because of how controlled how centralized the power is there now.
Yeah, interesting. I would have. That surprised me that Overclan can't get there yet. Yeah, wonder if they'll be getting closer as techs improve. Let's see. Oh, we can get the Dame's Head from Catarata.
Yeah.
Tremendous value there if they built out a fleet of trade ships and went for it. And, yeah, it would be interesting. So, we mentioned we think Empire fireworks to watch this coming week. Anything else to keep an eye on?
I'd be hopeful for more conflict within the dwarves to try and get that centralized, but I think we've covered the board pretty well. So
Well, appreciate the time and good luck on Saturday.
thank you.